So I am talking to Aditya, Tuhon Aditya, who's my teacher. And one of the first questions I want to ask you is to do with FMA in general. Would you give everybody who doesn't really understand what the Filipino martial arts are and what Pekiti Tirsia Kali in particular are? Can you just explain that really quickly to us?
You've asked not a very simple question, because the Filipino martial arts are many things to many different people, and it really depends on. I sort of liken it to, if you say dance in India, right? Are you talking about Bharatanatyam or Odissi? Are you talking about every single region has its own dance form? Every single region has that dance form has originated from a certain context of culture and geography and history. And so literally, if you travel to the Philippines, every single island you go to, every single village you go to, every single family that you would go to might have its own unique martial art. So to categorize FMA as, I know what you're asking me. You're asking me about the most common forms of FMA, which are the weapon arts. But to characterize the FMA as just weapon-based arts, I think would be doing it a major disservice. So you have everything within the Filipino martial arts. That's one of the reasons I love the Filipino martial arts. You want to do weapons, you have weapons. You want to do empty hands, you have empty hands. You want to do grappling, you have grappling. You want to do range weapons, you have range weapons. You have all sorts. You have the whole gambit of weapons, from short sword to long swords and spears, and bow and arrow, knives. You have it. It can be whatever you want it to be, and that, I think, is one of the beautiful things about the Filipino martial arts, that it molds itself to whatever the practitioner is, also not just where he's coming from or where she's coming from. So the martial arts you've done before or the martial arts you're doing currently, but also what you are looking specifically for. It can be anything and everything. Pekiti, on the other hand, is a little bit easier to talk about. It's a family style of the Tortar family. Its current guardian and head is my teacher, Tuhon. And it is essentially, at least in its most common form, weapon-based martial art. Mm-hmm. But I'm just gonna add in there. This is something that's very personal to me. What I'm going to say right now, it's a blade-based martial art, which is slightly different is slightly more specific way than just saying a weapon-based martial art.
So I think what I'm actually trying to get at, and I totally understand what you're saying about FMA being like a wider umbrella, is when we say, for example, Pekiti Tirsia Kali, we also talk about, we say arnis, we say eskrima, we say all these different things. And even within FMA, you've got all these different kind of subsystems, right? Of martial arts under Kali, so to speak. What makes Pekiti Tirsia Kali Pekiti Tirsia Kali? What makes it this?
You asked me a question which doesn't have a straight answer. However, this is literally the first question that I ever asked GT. I had just gotten off the plane. His wife had picked me up from the airport, and we were driving home. We were going to pick up GT, and the other guys who were there on that trip were training, and we went picking up. And on the way back, there was literally Tita Gigi on my left and GT on my right. And I was talking to GT about what makes Pekiti, right? Like, how do I know that what I'm doing is Pekiti?
Yeah.
And there are a couple of different ways to answer this. The answer that I like to give, because it works best for me and it helps me to sort of view the art in a way that helps me train it and helps me teach it also best, is that as long as you are working under the principles of Pekiti, you are doing Pekiti. Whether you're using a single sword, or whether you're kicking and punching, or whether you're grappling, as long as you're working under the principles of Pekiti, you are doing Pekiti.
So you know what I'm going to ask you, right?
What are the principles of Pekiti? Now, again, that also depends. There used to be an old method of teaching, and then there's a newer method of teaching. And the older method of teaching was something called Dos Methodos, or the 12 methods. And the newer version of teaching is something called Trivi, or the Trivi formula. Now, with GT, I have done the Tri-V formula. So I can speak about the Tri-V formula because I haven't done enough dose methods to give you a proper analysis of the dose methods.
Before you do that, can you give us like a better kind of clear distinction between the two?
Now, again, I cannot, not because, again, I don't want to say I cannot because I can, but the thing is that dose methods is so vast and there's so much to explore within it. Everything that I'm talking, that I teach or that I talk about constantly are things that I have spent years and years and years and years training. I spent a lot of time working on Tri-V. Dose methods I have started a few years ago. And I do not feel comfortable enough with it to give you proper definitive answers on those methods. It's going to take me at least in my opinion another decade before I can probably understand those methods to give you proper understanding of or proper analysis of things to do with those methods. But I can talk about Tri-V.
Okay.
And when we talk about principles of Tri-V, we are talking about essentially, or at least we start with 3 basic shapes. And the first shape is an X like this. You have a cross and you have a triangle, this way or this way, whichever one, right? These are the 3 basic shapes that you start with. On top of this, you can add a circle, you can add a square, right? So these are the basic shapes of Tri-V, and it is these shapes from where we get our principles, most of our principles. And this is the easiest way for me to explain it. Now, when we look at the X, for example, we're talking about our diagonal lines, or we're talking about ranges. So the bottom of the X can be long range, medium range, close range. We're also talking about angular footwork. We're also talking about bisecting lines. So under the umbrella of these shapes, you have a whole bunch of little principles that can come in. Principles, another simple way of talking about principles is principles are a way for me to be able to sort of make sense of the chaos of combat or sort of devise my strategy as to how I'm going to approach this. So a simple example is someone is, I'm in a weapon-based fight for whatever bizarre reason I've got into a weapon-based fight. What should my targeting principles be? And in what order should I attack what targets? What should my footwork principles be? What should my range principles be? Now, targeting principles, let's get specific. Targeting principles, let's say that for my first target that I want from long ranges, I want to be hitting his hand, right? So when we talk about Tri-V, we generally want to look at trying to finish the encounter as quickly as possible. And we have a sort of obsession with 3. So you see 3s a lot. So you can break these principles down into sort of like a 3-step phase of combat. So the first step could be, and again, this is not the only way of breaking it up, but I'm trying to explain something as vague as principles as clearly as I can, because principles can be something very, very vague, but can also be something very, very specific.
Specific, yeah.
So it's and that's also goes back into sort of the difficulty of Tri-V as to why people struggle to learn Tri-V very often, because it's very fluid. It doesn't have the structure that maybe like those methods has a lot more structure.
So isn't that kind of a good way to kind of separate them, where we talk about fluidity and structure? Isn't that one way that we can kind of?
Well, again, now I don't want to say that that is a specific way, because those methods can also have a lot of fluidity.
Right.
But when GT teaches Tri-V, I think one of his attempts was to take away a lot of the more stylistic aspects of Pekiti. This is the way I see it. And a lot of those, it's not to say that those stylistic aspects are necessarily bad or anything, but he wanted to be a little bit more specialized in what do I need to get you from 0 to fighting as quickly as possible.
What did GT teach first?
Me?
No, teach first. Dose methods. He taught dose methods first.
This is something that you need to talk to the older Tuhons, the Tuhon Bill McGrath, the Tuhon Philip, because I have stories from GT, I have stories from Tuhon Philip, I have stories from some of the Filipino Tuhons, and the way it exactly happened is sort of up for debate. GT will say something and then somebody else will say something. So what I do know is, this is what said, that the first 3 years, I know how GT trained, how he was taught. So GT was his first 3 years from the age of 6 to 9. He was taught just footwork. And then from 9 to 10, he was taught just the first. So we have the abecedario, which is the 12 attacks.
Yeah.
But then you also have 12 sets of 12. So you have 144 attacks.
Mm-hmm.
GT was taught those 12 sets from 9 years to 10 years. So every month he was given another set of 12. And the story goes that right now he was just training against a tree or against an inanimate object. He hadn't touched sticks or hit sticks. It was all solo training till now. And so every month he would learn a new set of 12. So the first would be the basic abecedario, then the next month would be the reverse abecedario, the next month would be the first double false drill, then the reverse double false drill, like that. So so he learned the 144 attacks. The other reason sort of complicated as to what GT taught first is because it was a long time ago. And from that first generation of students, it's better to sort of ask them, and even they might have slightly different answers.
What I'm trying to get at is, and I understand what you're saying, is I'm just trying to understand chicken egg. Like, did Jose Methodos, when I say come first, was Tri-V kind of an evolution of an existing system that GT was raising?
Yes, but the thing about when you talk about Pekitis, now we're sort of getting into the mythology of Pekiti. And I'm using the word mythology because
methodology or mythology?
Mythology. I'm using that word because a lot of stories change. Like GT's version of stories evolve or change.
Okay.
And other people's version of stories evolve or change. So sort of pinning it down into this happened first is really hard. Only the people who are there can probably give you good answers as to even things like 64 attacks, right? It's become this thing of Pekiti where everyone is like 64 attacks, I had my 64 attacks, right? Now, the question is, because I've heard differing stories about this, GT will say that everything I teach you comes from my grandfather. But then you'll hear stories about how GT and his early students made 64 attacks for a demonstration in New York, right? So, I've
heard that story, yeah.
So which is true, right? I am not in a position to say which is true. I don't think it matters, to be super honest, necessarily which one is true, because this is how I approach training now. Because GT is getting sort of older. The first time I went to the Philippines, we trained 15 hours a day. At that time, now we do much less. He's a lot older.
I mean, that's something I actually specifically wanted to ask you. Like, when was the first time? How did you get to GT? Like, what was that? What was the catalyst there? Because you're in India, you're in Delhi, you're training all sorts of things, and then suddenly you end up in the Philippines doing this kind of Filipino martial art that is kind of a hereditary family martial art. How did that happen?
Just before I go, I just wanted to just finish the previous point, because this is something that I'm really passionate about why I go to the Philippines still, and how I train with GT still, because this is something that I see a lot of misunderstandings over when it comes to why people should go to GT or should not go to GT, and also how they approach teachers, especially with this much experience. The gift of GT currently may not be in his ability to teach you for many hours. The gift that GT can currently give you is an insight into how he solves combat-based problems. And that is the true treasure. So for me, whether I'm learning, whatever it is that I'm learning now, right? Whether it's Tri-V or whether I try and pick up dosimetros or whatever it is I'm trying to learn. For me, I'm always looking for insights into GT's brain or the brains of the people who came before. Because GT always says that everything that I teach you has been paid for in blood. So the people who developed this art, if they used it in battlefields and if they didn't survive, then they survived, which is why we got it. The people who didn't survive, they could not pass on their knowledge. It's only the people who survived who pass on their knowledge. So everything that they did has been paid. Everything we do has been paid for in blood. So I want to sort of delve as deeply as I can into their ways of solving problems. And that is why, whatever it is, for whether it's 64 attacks, I don't care whether 64 attacks came from his grandfather, or this came from GT, or this came from this person, this came from Silat, this came from this, San Miguel, or wherever. For me, I want to learn as much as I can, because every second I spend with GT, And every instance I get to train one of these things in Pekiti gives me a glimpse behind his thought process. And that is for me the true treasure of GT. As to how I sort of ended up in the Philippines, I did. I was brought up with like stories of mythology from all over the world, whether it was King Arthur and it was the Indian myths and it was something else and something else. And this, I was very fascinated always with swords, King Arthur and Excalibur and the Knights of the Round Table and stuff. And I was always fascinated by one and always wanted to learn sword arts. And so I trained to Japanese arts while I was in India. I trained for about 4 or 5 years, and then along the way, Tuhon Kanishk, who's my senior many times over, and also a teacher of mine, he had just gone to the Philippines and he came back, and and that time I wasn't training with him, I was training with somebody else, and he came back and he called me up. He said, Adi, I know that you really love the sword, and I've just done this weapon-based art and I'm doing a workshop for it. I want you to come. That was in 2007, 6, 7, 8, something like that. And I went to spend 3 days with him. This was in Rishikesh. This was before he had his center now in the mountains. And for me, and I took my bookend with me, my Japanese, my training sword. And for me, what struck me about Pekiti wasn't the weapon stuff at that time. And I didn't go to the Philippines for the weapon stuff, actually. I stuck around in the Philippines for the weapon stuff, but I didn't go there. I am not a very big person. I'm short, I'm thin, I'm light. And in my training before this, I had a lot of fear, whether it was fear about sparring, whether it was fear of what happened if I got into an altercation on the street. I had a lot of fear in me. And when I went for this workshop for 3 days, by the end of those 3 days, my fear was gone.
Wow.
And I came back to the class I was training at that time, and I was sparring the next day, and I saw the difference. But I did not know enough of the art, or I hadn't trained enough of the art to keep the fear away. So it came back very quickly. And then I spent the next couple of years looking for a way to go to the Philippines myself. I wanted to immerse myself in the culture, in the place that spawned this art. I wanted to, and I'd also, the thing about Tuhon Kanishk is he's had all these adventures going here and there. And I was very inspired by his stories of travel and training, and I really wanted to do it myself. And so I looked for a bunch of ways of going to train in the Philippines. And finally, again, it was a lot thanks to Tuhon Kanishk that I managed to get in touch with GT. And I sort of just landed up in Bacolod, which is this tiny city. I had spoken to GT for 3 minutes on the phone before that, and I had no idea the city even existed. I sort of landed up, and I was greeted by this sweet old lady who put me a car and took me into the middle of nowhere, and that's where I met GT.
And how much time in total have you spent with GT, like FaceTime?
I don't know. It's I used to, so obviously during COVID, things have changed. I haven't been to the Philippines in like 2 or 3 years, but pre-COVID, I would go every year, spend 3 months, a month and a half, a month, just as much time as I could.
Right.
I don't.
You've trained with so many different teachers. What was it about? Was there something specific about GT that made him stand apart, or something that about his methodology or the way he taught that was different for you? And has that reflected in your own teaching style in any way?
I think it was a couple of things actually. When I went to the Philippines, I didn't really know what I was getting into. I needed something different. I needed a change. I needed to address. There was this gaping hole in me, of fear that I needed to address, and I really wanted to. I had got a clue as to how to address it when I had done this workshop, and so I spent a lot of time trying to figure that out. And that's the reason I got there. Now, to be fair, a lot of the early training in Pekiti, for me, I have to give credit to the guys who were with me in the Philippines at that time. A lot of them are also Tuhons now. There was Tuhon Peter and his students. There was Dean and Felix. There was Tuhon Belton. There was Tuhon Jim. There was my friend Trevor from Kenya. There was Tuhon. I already said Tuhon Belton again already. And especially Tuhon Peter. It took a lot of time outside of class just to work me through the basics, because GT is not used to you coming there with zero knowledge of Pekiti.
Okay.
I had done 3 days of Pekiti many years before, and he's not used to you coming there with zero knowledge. And so my first day in the Philippines, they put a sword in my hand and I was taught pasada. I had not done any basic angles, no basic footwork. I just put sword in my hand and let's do this. And so it was Deepita who really took a lot of time outside of class to really teach me basic footwork, basic strikes, and all that kind of stuff. Apart from that, when I went to the Philippines, I think for me, what kept me around, or what draws me to Pekiti is something that I do attribute to GT. Now, when I went to the Philippines, I already came with a decent amount of movement practice underneath me. I'd already been training the martial arts for 13 years, and my previous teacher was such a stickler for basics that things like my coordination and my balance, my ability to absorb new information was already pretty good. But what GT gave me was twofold. Number one is, I'll never forget this. We were sitting to eat. And he said to me, I was going to go home soon. He said to me, Addy, whatever you do, I'm going to support you. You want to start a training group? I'll support you. Whatever you do, I'll always support you. And that meant a lot to me. And the other thing is that whether by design or not by design, GT never answers my questions straight. If I ask him a question, he'll never give me a straight answer. And what that forced me to do was, it forced me to really, really look at the information that I had, distill it down into its base components, drill the living daylights out of those base components, and then slowly try and answer the whys myself. Now, by the whys, I mean, let's say that I am doing just simple angle 1, angle 2, right? And I'm doing it by myself and there's no one around, or I'm doing it by myself and my teachers, maybe he's deflecting all the questions that I'm asking him. And so I'm asking myself questions like, okay, why do I need to go from my shoulder to my shoulder? Like, why do I load on my shoulder, right? Why am I doing diagonal lines at all? Why does the angle of my wrist need to be a certain angle? Why am I doing follow throughs? Or why am I not doing a follow through? Why are my feet moving in these certain angles? Why is my feet and hand coordination in this sort of way? Why is my relationship to center line in this sort of way? Or what is my relationship to center line? What is my relationship between my hands and my legs? Where is my opponent? So there are all these questions that only come up when you train by yourself. When you have a teacher who's giving you all of the answers, you never have an opportunity to ask yourself these questions. And when you never have the opportunity to ask yourself these questions, you never have the opportunity to problem solve. And then the way GT does it is that you come back to him with the solutions, and then he tests your solutions. And then you go back and then you tweak something, and then you change something, and then you add something. And so this is how you sort of evolve your practice and evolve your understanding of Pekiti.
So this is something that you and I have spoken about quite a bit with my own training because of lockdown and the way we've had to train. And something that I get asked a lot is this whole idea of solo training in an art like Pekiti, because I get told and asked a lot that it is very clearly a partner-based art. This is a partner-based art. How can you be training this alone? Because I know you spent quite a large chunk of your training, especially initially, on your own, but you're Tuhon, and you're one of the youngest Tuhons out there, aren't you?
Yes.
So
initially I still spend maximum. So when I came back from the Philippines the first time, I was told by GT, you cannot train this art by yourself.
Yeah.
Now, and that's why I sort of established a small training group, because Tuhon Kanish lived very far away from where I lived at that time. So I didn't have access to him as frequently as I would like. So I would go to him, maybe I tried a couple of times a month, and then sort of reduced because he was pretty far away. And so I set up a training group thinking I have people to practice with. But when you go to GT, just the way that he is, the way he trains, there are people who will sink or swim. The people who get to swim and the people who do well, he'll take you from 0 to 100 like this, really, really quickly. Everybody else, especially if you don't have the level, nobody's GT, right? But it takes you a lot longer to train somebody up to that level. So I had nobody to train with, actually. I had people to do basic angles with, but a lot of the other stuff I had nobody to do with, nobody to train that stuff with. And so my issue was, how do I train all of the other things that I'm supposed to. And so I sort of started to develop my own practice, my own solo practice. And then I started to realize, and then I started to again come upon these whys and whats and hows and these problem solving questions, these problems that I had to solve. And the only way that I knew if I was doing the right thing or the wrong thing was 1 year later when I would go to the Philippines. And then I would train with GT and I would fight and I would train with all these other Tuhons. And then I would know, okay, did this make sense to do? Do I need to change this? Do I need to add this, etc.? All of that kind of stuff. And so slowly I would come back with, and always I would try, and even now, until the last MP code I went to the Philippines, I always try and figure out what I'm going to train before I come back from the Philippines. So I take everything he's given me and I distill it down into the repetitive drills that I can do. And I want them fixed before I come back from the Philippines. And I know I'm going to spend my year doing this. Now, I vehemently disagree with the fact that Pekiti is a partner-based art. And the reason is very simple. If my basic angles suck, I'm going to suck as a partner, right? I can only take in so much information at one go. Right? I cannot take in endless amounts of information. Now, when I have a partner in front of me who is giving me, who's feeding me in a certain way, maybe I have to use footwork, maybe I have to judge distance or range and timing, all of this stuff I have to do. That's not the time to be fixing my basic angles. There's too much information, there's too much stimuli, I cannot fix my basics. If my basics are shit, I'm going to suck as a partner. So it's my responsibility to make sure that my basics are solid, so that when I go to partner work and my angle, I have to give a basic angle to someone, that angle is on point. It's perfect.
Yeah.
That means that I don't have to anymore worry about delivering good angles. I no longer have to struggle to coordinate my hands and my feet. And all I have to do is worry about things like range, things like timing. If I'm doing some kind of sensitivity drill or something like that, the basics, I just have to worry about the mechanics of the drill that I'm doing. I don't have to worry about any of the other stuff. And this is something that we just don't do in Pekiti. Everyone is like partner. I don't have a partner. How do I train it? Jiu-Jitsu, BJJ, yes, I can understand why BJJ is massively, incredibly hard. You can still train BJJ by yourself, but to a pretty low extent.
Yeah.
Kali is not like that. Kali, in fact, especially if you want to fight with Kali, if you want to stick fight, if you want to get into that world, you can do 90% of your training by yourself. And yes, it helps to have a partner, but you want to treat your partner like a luxury and your solo training as an essential, not the other way around.
Yeah, so that's a total flip on the head from what a lot of people think about this, I think.
Yes, and again, go back to GT's story, right? GT did footwork for 3 years by himself. Yes, the story goes his grandfather beat him with a stick, but his grandfather wasn't like partnering with him, right? Then the next year he did 144 attacks by himself. There was no partner there. So he's already spent 4 years of his basic training by himself. So if you don't go through this basic stuff, then why do you think you're going to suddenly be good at the partner stuff? And people forget what basic stuff means. Basic stuff doesn't mean basic angles. Basic stuff means simple things like how long should my step be? Like what should the length of my step be? How much should my knees be? How much should my knees be bent? Right? What is my relationship to center line? Where am I loading? What is my coordination between my striking and my stepping? This is basic. And what people fail to understand is, so this is how I train. I have a checklist in my head, right? I have a checklist for everything. And if I can, like a simple thing, like let's say talk about like basic angles, right? My checklist is I want to go from my shoulder to my shoulder. I want to follow through if I'm doing a fluid strike. I want to have the edge of the blade facing in the right way, right? These are some basic checklists. When I can hit my checklist 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 times, that means I have reached stage 1. That means now I can get correct repetition in. Before this, everything was just to get to the stage where I can get correct repetition in. Now it counts. Now I've reached stage 1. Before this was stage 0. Now I take this stage 1. Now is when I get all those repetitions in. And Kali, well, I can't say Kali, but Pekiti is all about stacking information. So let's take footwork, right? I'm working my basic footwork rule. I have my checklist in my head. When I can get 9 times out of 10, 10 times out of 10, my footwork checklist spot on, then I can maybe, after some more repetition, put my footwork on autopilot. And then I stack on top of my footwork my basic angles. Now I no longer have to be worrying about what my feet are doing. My feet are on autopilot. Now I can give full attention to what my hands are doing, what my striking is doing. Now, once both of these things can be on autopilot, then I'm going to focus on things like what is the coordination between my striking and my footwork? Do I step before I strike? Do I strike before I step? Do I strike and step at the same time? What is my relationship to center line? Because now I can deal with these concepts in peace without having to worry also about, oh, what my footwork doing? Oh, am I striking correctly? Because these things are on autopilot. So it's a thing about stacking. I'm stacking information.
So, I mean, I will use that to segue onto, I did ask a couple of fellow practitioners, and I told them I was going to be speaking to you. One of the questions that I got asked a lot, this is something we've discussed as well, is given everything that you're talking about, especially with solo training, especially with this kind of methodology you're discussing, where does sparring fit into this? And I do want to discuss sparring in a little bit more detail, because this is a place that we've had kind of some heated debates, even with friends in the Pekiti circle.
Here's the thing. If you don't want to spar, you don't need to spar. But if you don't spar, I do not think you can fight.
Right.
If you want, because again, the Filipino martial arts can be anything. Are you doing this because you like the fluidity of it? Are you doing this because you like the way it makes you feel or whatever, right? You can do it for many reasons, health reasons, whatever you want to do it. You're doing it because it's your culture or whatever. But if you're doing it as a martial art, you need to be able to spar it in some way, shape, or form. You have to be able to spar because it is an art of war.
Yeah.
And it's a weapon-based art of war. Now, the caveat is, if I'm beating you with a stick every week, how do I make that sparring consistent without getting injured? Right? Now, there are a couple of ways of doing this. The first is I divide sparring into 3 different things. I divide sparring into distance sparring, technical sparring, and full contact sparring.
Right.
Distance sparring is when I'm not touching you. Right? This is how I generally introduce people to sparring, because even this concept of stringing combinations together with your weapon is alien to most people. And then even if you put them through the work of making combinations with weapons, as soon as you have somebody in front of you who is again moving around, it's an extra stimuli, and then people start to stutter and they forget a lot of the basics and all that stuff. So that itself is a process that you put them through, just so that it's a step-by-step process. Now there's somebody in front of you moving around. You're also trying to like move according to what they're doing. You're trying to time them. You're trying to make openings in your mind according to what they're doing without ever touching them. So there's a large aspect of adaptability and improvisation, on the spot improvisation, involved in distance sparring.
I see.
Thank you. I'm going to sneeze a couple of more times. I have a few.
That's fine. But listen, I just want to, while you're sneezing, so it seems like step 1 and step 2, you're still it's still quite an intellectual process, right? You have fought in the Philippines.
Not an intellectual process.
How?
It cannot be an intellectual process. Sparring cannot be an intellectual process.
If you're distance sparring and technical sparring.
It cannot be an intellectual process, because if I'm here, I'm always one step behind.
Okay.
The thing about martial arts is, and this is where people struggle, especially Filipino martial artists, because most Filipino martial artists come into the Filipino martial arts later in their life. Very few Filipino martial artists only have ever done Filipino martial arts, right? And so you have X amount of years of learning in a certain way. You're absorbing information intellectually in a certain way. When you're doing the martial arts, it's very much a body-based experience, right? The mind comes into it a little bit later. Let's take just like simple, kickboxing sparring. If I am thinking of next time he does this, I'm going to do this. Next time he does this, I'm going to think of this. Or he's punching me, I have to parry now. By the time I'm thinking this, I've already been hit in the face.
Right.
So I need to get to a level where my body is able to respond appropriately. And then you can start to look for, this is how the mind can start to work, where you can start to look for patterns in what your opponent does. Patterns or tells or openings. So I don't have to worry about parrying a punch because my body understands range, my body understands timing, and my body understands that parry. My body understands what it needs to do to do that parry. I don't have to think about it anymore. And so that frees my mind to look, to observe my opponent. And then I can start to sort of set my opponent up. So again, let's just stick with the punching kicking. Let's say every single time I jab my opponent. I see that he parries really far across his body, right? I see him doing that a couple of times. The next time I can pick the jab through the hook because he sent that arm so far across that opens him up for the hook, or I can pick the jab and then throw a jab behind it, right? So I'm looking for those patterns and then I am preying on those patterns. That's one way the mind can work. Right. But it cannot be, even when I'm doing distance sparring, I am doing the same thing. I may not make contact with my opponent, but I'm looking for those patterns. I'm looking for those tells. I'm looking for when that angle one comes so I can do angle three. I'm looking for the when angle one comes so I can do my umbrella to that angle one, right? But at the same time, I'm still responding to my opponent. So when he's coming forward, I'm going back. Or when he's coming forward, maybe I'm flanking him to the side. It cannot be that I cannot be thinking because then I will always be in the past. I need to be in the future and setting things up. With technical sparring, because we haven't spoken about technical sparring, I know you have a question. I just want to talk because technical sparring is the biggest thing that people misunderstand. Technical sparring for me is the closest to live blade sparring that you can get, because technical sparring is I'm trying to touch you without being touched. I'm trying to touch your arms. If you have a helmet, then you can touch the head also, but I'm trying to touch your arms, legs without being touched myself. And that's very akin to blades. But if you're actually fighting with the sword, I don't want you touching me with the sword. And technical sparring is where you are really is where a lot of the finesse comes about. I'm not swinging like a wild man anymore. There's a lot of finesse, a lot of setups. I might fake you here to be able to cut here, or I've noticed that the way you're standing, that live hand always goes somewhere. So maybe I'm gonna make you move in a way where your arms are always open and that exposes the live hand, then target the live hand. Or maybe I'm going to make you lean back and touch your legs. There's a lot of finesse involved with technical sparring. It's not just tippy tap tap. Okay, no.
Tippy tap tap. Okay, so I actually do really want to talk to you about your sparring experience when you went to the Philippines. Because what would they call you?
So they have a couple of names for me. One of them was Adi the Painless.
Because
I try my best not to show any pain. This is a deal I made with GT a while ago. But the first time I went, he would demonstrate on me, and it's a thing of honor for us to be demonstrated on, right? We feel very happy, but it hurts. And so I would be I'd be screaming, and he'd get upset that I'm making all these noises, and so he stopped demonstrating on me. The next time I went back, I swore I would not make a noise, and that taught me one of the most important lessons actually, because I realized that I was reacting to the fear of the pain rather than the pain itself. So he's got me in a lock, and it's not hurting yet, but I think it should hurt, and that's why I'm like, ah. But actually, if you relax and you actually feel what it is that you're feeling, you realize that, oh, I'm actually not in that much trouble. And so now it's become a joke between me and GT, where he loves demonstrating on me and trying to cause a lot of pain, and I'm just like. So when I was fighting this friend of mine, and at the end of it, he was like, I just hit you, and you just walked straight through, and you do not feel any pain. And you added the painless, and actually it hurts a lot. Well, it depends. A lot of when you're fighting with the stick, there's a lot of adrenaline through you, so it may not hurt that much, but it does hurt. You just don't show it.
How many stick fights have you done?
I don't know.
And that's like approximately 10, 20, 50?
I think about 20.
About 20 stick fights. And if anybody came to you and they were afraid of stick fighting, what would you say to them?
This has happened a lot. So I used to do this a lot in the Philippines, where, especially with the ladies, where generally for men, it's oftentimes easier to just step in there. For women, it's a little bit harder. But once they start fighting, they are insane. It's like some of the best stick fights I've seen have been between women. Just the aggression, the technique, it's really impressive. But just that initial push sometimes they need. So I used to do this thing where it was like I forgot, we used to call it something. I forgot what we used to call it, where it used to be me versus whoever the lady was who was hesitant. It was like a break-in fight.
A break-in.
And it was, we had spoken beforehand, and we'd established sort of this understanding and this trust, and I talked to them how it was going to go. And it was just getting them, acclimatized with this crazy situation where you're in the middle of this circle of chanting crazy people. You have a stick in your hand and you're going to beat someone, and you have this helmet and you can't see properly, and just sort of just getting them through that first fight. However, the last time I did that, it went a little bit wrong, which is a different story. I don't want to digress into that, but we can talk about that if you want. That's one way I would do it, because the truth is that I don't know of another way that you can ease someone into stick fighting other than that. Because at the end of the day, it's gonna be really scary. Even for me, it's still scary. And the only way to sort of get over that initial fear is to just do it. And you can do a break-in fight, and that's fine. But the only real way to fight is to fight.
What would you say to somebody? Because somebody said this to me the other day, because somebody was like, "Oh, you're a Kali practitioner." I was like, "Yeah, I'm brand new. Like, I'm whatever." And they're like, "Have you had an actual stick fight yet?" And I said, "No." And then they said, "No, then you're not a Kali practitioner." They were like, "It doesn't matter what your rank is. Until you have had a stick fight in the Philippines, you cannot call yourself."
I mean, that's dumb.
Do you think that's dumb? Because it's not the first time I've heard that.
I think that's dumb. I don't think, again, like, how can any one person, first of all, how can any one person pigeonhole Kali and be like, this is what Kali is, and if you don't do this, that's not Kali. I mean, you can't say that. Kali can be anything to anybody, and it's really up to you why you're training Kali, right? And not everybody, like, for example, I've been trying to get stick fights started in India since I first came back. The equipment for us to afford things like fencing helmets, to afford the gloves and stuff, it's really expensive. It's really hard for me to get a hold of these things, and that's been the main reason why I've not been able to start stick fights in India, because just the equipment itself is
so
hard. Yeah. Does that mean that you are not a Kali practitioner? I don't think so. You, just because you haven't had the opportunity to stick fight, that doesn't mean you aren't a Kali practitioner. Will I say that will I say that you know how you will react under pressure situation? No, I don't think you can. I don't think you will know unless, but again, here's how you can supplement that. Because what is the likelihood of you getting into a stick fight on the street? Right? So what is the real world application to stick fights? We can say, yes, okay, where this is how the art fights, it's a weapon art and all of these kind of things. But at some point, your art also has to have some real world application. Like, what's the difference? Yes, but you're not fighting empty hands. You're fighting with a stick.
Right.
Right? And empty hands fighting is very different to stick fighting. Now, for me, the relevance of a stick fight, and this is one of the main things that I take away from it, is your ability to deal with intensity and adrenaline and someone trying to smash your head in. That's one big thing I get from a stick fight. Is a stick fight the only place you can get that experience? No. You can spar in boxing, you can spar in Muay Thai, you can do it in Jiu-Jitsu. All of these, every single martial art has the mechanics within it to get you to the same place. When shit goes down, can you handle yourself?
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're looking for. That's what your takeaway from all of these fights. That's the point. Because you're not walking around with a stick in your hand just waiting for someone else with a stick to come across and hit you. Yes, you can talk about knife sparring and be like self-defense, all those kind of things. But then again, is stick versus stick fighting going to prepare you for when someone's trying to stab you in your empty hands? I'm not so sure that crossover exists. Is it going to help me deal with the intensity? Because especially in the Philippines, they are very proud of this art.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a lot of passion and they fight with insane amounts of intensity. And also, a lot of the guys who end up in the Philippines are either special forces or military or law enforcement or this or that. And so when you fight one of these guys, the level of intensity that a sniper for the special forces is going to bring to a fight, or the close quarter combat instructor of the special forces is going to bring to a fight, who's also a special forces soldier himself, is something that is super hard to replicate. And if I can survive in that intensity, if my brain and my body and my ability to problem solve function in that intensity, then I think I can function in real world intensity. That's the closest that I can possibly get without someone actually trying to stab me.
I want to ask you something else about this and then move on to another topic, which is when it just comes to sparring. So I've watched all of whatever fights you have online, and I've watched a bunch of other fights, especially YouTube and stuff. And it just seems to me that we spend so much time working on whether it's our combinations or working on, but when you see these stick fights, and obviously my eyes are so untrained that I don't maybe exactly know what I'm looking at, but it looks like these really quick exchanges that look like very simple combinations, people going, and it's so quick, and it just looks like it's like basic angles, and then you're together. And isn't it crazy that we put so much time and so much effort into working these different techniques, but when it actually comes down to it,
this has been the bane of my existence. This simple question has been the bane of my existence for at least 7 years now, because my experience was when I'm fighting, or because I've seen hundreds of fights.
Yeah.
Right.
Like in person, like you've seen.
Yeah, over there, because I generally try and end my trip to the Philippines with this global convention, and there are fights at the end of every day. So you see hundreds of fights at the end of that. So apart from the fights that I've done, I've seen hundreds of fights. I fought people from all over the world. I fought Tuhons and everybody, right? I fought GT once.
You fought GT?
I mean, it was more, I won't say a fight, it was more him wheeling on us with a stick. But yes, and that was without any protection. There was no helmet or no gloves. It was an interesting day. So, and my biggest thing was, I'm doing all of these things, but when I'm fighting, when I'm seeing people fight, I'm not seeing these things in action. So what the hell am I doing? And why am I doing it? And essentially now the way I look at teaching and training is I break things down into 2 bits. I break things down into attribute training and fight training, right? Like there are some things, like let's say T footwork or like a cat stance or something, right? Why am I doing that? I'm not going to do that and use that in a fight. So why am I doing that? Now, the way that I use that footwork specifically is that footwork is teaching me to sync. Because when I'm using a weapon, it's an extension of my body, and it has weight. And so when I swing it, it's going to pull me away from me. It's going to pull me in front. It's going to pull away from me. I want to control that weapon. And learning to sink down helps me to control that weapon. It helps me to not be pulled away by that weapon, right? So simple things like this help me look at all of the art. And some of the stuff that I'm like, this makes no sense at all in a fight perspective. I will never see this in a fight. But if you look at it as an attribute training, or fight training, then you start to be like, okay, what attributes, I may not ever see this in a fight, but what attributes am I learning through this movement that may help me eventually in a fight? That's the way, because now I truly believe that everything has a purpose in Pekiti. That's how I teach it, that's how I train it. If you don't know the purpose, that's on you. It's your job to figure out that purpose. And when you divide it into these 2 things, attribute or fight, then it becomes easier to figure out
where to put it.
And it doesn't mean there's no crossover. Something that just because I'm putting something in the attribute corner here doesn't mean that it doesn't actually have a fight application as well. It may just mean my understanding of it is not good enough to apply it into the fight. That's part 1 of this answer. Part 2 of this answer is that in most fights, you see basic angles. You see angle 1, angle 2. These are the most basic angles you see. You might see horizontal strikes. These are the most common things that you will see across fights. But a lot of the stuff that you also see that people, because I just had a YouTube troll talk about this just the other day, actually, about, what is all the fancy stuff that you teach in your fights? So first of all, I don't teach fancy stuff. But second of all, a fight isn't just when you're crossing sticks. A fight is a larger engagement. A fight is how you judge distance. A fight is how you position yourself. A fight is how you make openings. For example, I'll never forget, I fought Tuhon Mick once, and he broke my thumb. And I'll never forget, I've gone over that, I have that clip, and I have gone over that clip again and again and again and again because there was a beautiful setup. He was far away from me. We were not in striking range. He went angle 1, 2, 3 in the air. 4 came behind, entered with an umbrella like a 4, and then came down. There was a thrust or something that smacked into my thumb. But it was the if he had just done that entry, it would not have worked. It was that 1, 2, 3, 4 that got me sort of responding in a certain way, which set me up for the strike that eventually broke my thumb. So it was the setup that led to the successful engagement. And you will see this again and again and again and again. You'll see people setting things up, and that's what a technical fight is. When you see these setups, when you see strategy and tactics, which don't have to do. People have this like movie idea of a fight that's go pa 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 pa. It doesn't have to go like that. It's chaotic. It's insanity. But there's a lot of stuff that happens before the engagement and after the engagement. It's not just about can I enter, but it's also about exiting, right? You don't, or if I'm in that clinch situation, what are my options over there? And can I solve these problems in the moment? And so that's part 2. There's a lot of stuff happening outside of the engagements themselves. Part 3 is, and I experienced this first time when I had to fight my left hand. So this was the year I actually now have I made a deal with GT, which is that I am going to go to the convention uninjured. Otherwise, I used to go every year to the convention, and this was torn, or that was broken, or this something or the other. So one year I went. This was when I broke my thumb fighting Tuhon Mick earlier, the previous day, and I had torn my shoulder. No, not my shoulder, my elbow. Something I had hurt one of these things with GT before I even got there. So basically, the result was I couldn't hold a stick in my right hand, but I really wanted to fight that day, and so I had to fight with my left hand. And I realized the difference in fighting with my left hand. Everything is harder because I have not that coordination, that sense of timing, that sense of distance is not there with my left hand, that is there with my right hand. So everything takes that extra little bit of thought or effort. It's a little bit less efficient, it's a little bit more telegraphed. My sense of distance is off, my sense of timing is off, my power is not the same, my footwork is a little bit off. And that's why your solo training comes in, or your previous training comes in. It's not just about fighting. Again, it goes back to attributes. That stuff is teaching me, even just solo training, swinging my stick in the air, flowing is teaching me to combine things. How do I go from one strike to the next strike to the next strike? How do I strike from anywhere else? So my stick can be anywhere, and I should be able to strike anywhere else. So a lot of the fight is just the end product of a lot of the work that you see. And you might not, never, ever will you use a movement in a fight the way you trained it.
Yeah.
Because fight is in the moment, right? You'll never have time to do a perfect something. But your ability to adapt a movement, your ability to problem solve, all of that stuff comes from before. So even though it looks chaotic, and it is chaotic, there's a lot of stuff that happens before it that helps you enter the chaos and exit the chaos and make sense of the chaos. And that's sort of the point of all of our training, to sort of try and not just make sense of the chaos, but eventually control the chaos. That's where you're trying to get, where everything that your opponent is doing is by your design. And that comes from, again, proper footwork, proper setups. You can be teaching your opponent a pattern. Maybe I'm teaching them every single time I come to my backhand, I'm going to do a certain movement. So every time he sees me get that stick there, he's expecting that movement, and I do something else. Like a setup can be something as simple as that, right? So I eventually want my opponent to do exactly what I want to do. In a stick fight, this is much harder to do than I think in empty hands fight, because in a stick fight, the easiest thing, and almost everybody, what they do is both people tend to engage at the same time. This guy will see me entering and he'll enter at the same time. So you see a lot of this happening, right? You don't see a lot of flanking and stuff. You see that in more technical fights, but that's where you want to get to eventually.
So I know we've been at this. There's one thing I do want to talk to you about. We probably can end up having another conversation later as well. But one of the things that has come up again and again is, I want to ask you this, and then I have like a follow-up question to it. Do you consider Pekiti a complete art in
Yeah.
and of itself.
Yes.
And I will follow that up by saying that you are also a Muay Thai teacher and you're also a BJJ teacher. So the reason I ask that question is I know that you supplement your training, or you fill in the gaps in the training with things from Muay Thai and things from BJJ. And so I just want to ask how you view that. Like, how do you see that? Is that you using your Pekiti as a framework and adding things into it and then creating something for yourself? Or are you saying, oh, I'm going to be doing Pekiti plus BJJ or Pekiti plus Muay Thai? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I'm a BJJ practitioner. I am not necessarily. I don't think I can call myself a teacher of BJJ, but yes, I'm a BJJ practitioner. I've been doing Muay Thai since, again, I started Muay Thai with Tuhon actually in 2003, 2, 3, something like that. It's the art that I've been practicing the longest. Currently, I train Muay Thai under another Tuhon Belton, who's also a very senior Muay Thai practitioner instructor in the States. Now, when I started Pekiti, for 3 years, I stopped training everything else. I already had like 13 years of martial arts under my belt at that time, 12, 13 years of martial arts. I stopped training everything else. For 3 years, I just focused on Pekiti because some stuff didn't make sense to me in my head. Some of the ways that I was viewing range and timing, I keep using these words, range and timing, because they're so important for engagements and we just don't talk about them. Things like range and timing, they just weren't making sense to me. The way that it seemed like the empty hand arts and the weapon arts just had opposite ways of looking at the same thing. I didn't understand how that worked. And so I stopped training everything else and I reworked my foundation to a weapon-based foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of those 3 years, it wasn't a conscious thing that I'm going to do 3 years and then I'm going to do whatever. But I had a couple. The thing I struggled with most in Pekiti was the empty hand stuff. And some stuff again didn't make sense to me. For example, if you look at, and this is not just Pekiti, if you look at most FMA videos online, whether teaching videos, even what I do, teaching videos or demonstration videos, you will see one huge commonality in 90% of the videos. In fact, 99% of the videos that you see, which is that you will see almost everything done as a counter. Someone is attacking you, and the practitioner is doing his empty hands as a counter to set attack, right? I was struggling to figure out how does Pekiti view offensive bridging or being offensive while being empty hands. I was really struggling to figure that thing out because GT has these giant hands and he just grab you and slap you. I don't have giant hands. I cannot just grab you and slap you. And being a small person, I'm always like all the height advantage is always to my opponent. And before I can grab them, they're going to be raining punches down on me. So how do I bridge that distance offensively instead of waiting for someone to attack me and then either I've been sucker punched or I'm already on the back foot. So I decided that I would restart Muay Thai because I wanted to answer that question. I want to understand how people offensively use empty hands. And then the other part of Pekiti that I really struggled with was the Dumog aspect of it, was the grappling aspect of it, right? Because again, I don't have like Tuhon Kanishk, one of the things that he's so good at, why he's so good at that is because he's so sensitive. And he flows, he knows exactly where your energy is, and he's so sensitive. And I don't have that. I don't have that developed sense of sensitivity. And I thought an art like BJJ would help me develop that sensitivity and help me answer the simple question of how does a smaller guy like me make this stuff work against a bigger guy who does not want me to do it to him? Because again, all of our demonstrations are my opponent is passive and he's allowing me to do all this stuff. As soon as he stops allowing me, how do I still make this stuff work? And so that's why I started those two arts. Now, the way that I see it now is that Pekiti for me is my base art. It has everything. I view it as a complete art. In fact, whenever I'm doing any other weapon-based art, specifically weapon-based art, because it's an easier comparison to understand, I end up just viewing it as Pekiti. I've done whether I was doing whether I'm trying Brilliant work or NSI with Tuhon Belton, a few times I've done it. In my head, I was just doing Pekiti. There was no difference for me in that. I was just seeing Pekiti principles expressed in all of that stuff. Now I view Muay Thai and Jiu Jitsu as lenses through which I can get a better understanding of my Pekiti. So let's talk about simple things like empty hand timing and empty hand range, right? My Muay Thai helps me to understand, especially sparring in Muay Thai, helps me to understand what a punch coming at my face looks like and feels like. And then into that context, can I try all of my Pekiti stuff? And then I can be like, okay, what do I need to do to make this thing work? My jiu-jitsu teaches me that in order to do these locks, I need to isolate the arm. I need to have good position. And the way I should isolate that arm. And only once I have good position and proper isolation of that arm, can I look to get that submission or look to get that break, right? And then when you put the two things together, then Muay Thai might help me to enter into a range where I can then get into clinch range. Then I can start working. Then my BJJ can start coming into play, where I can then look to work that isolation of the limb, or can maybe use the Muay Thai as a distraction to isolate that limb. So maybe I'm elbowing you in the face, and then as you're recoiling from the elbow, I'm using that to hyperextend your elbow. So, but I'm still doing Pekiti, right? I'm still doing all of these things still fall into the under the umbrella of Pekiti. Because again, like when we're talking about, but let's just stick with this example right now. In Pekiti, we have the concept of apexes. We have 18 apexes in the body, right? So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, your ankle, knee, hip, front of head, the solar plexus, groin, same on the back, right? Solar plexus or sternum or diaphragm. Now, these are not pressure points. These are places. So the way GT explains it is that these are places in the body that can form a triangle. So I can be like, that's a triangle, right? That's a triangle. Anywhere I'm standing, that's a triangle. But the way I understand it is these are places in the body that bend.
Yeah.
And so that means that if I need to lock you or if I need to disbalance you, then I want to disbalance any of these places or lock any of these places that bend. Right? So now I understand this through Pekiti that I want to be attacking that elbow, I want to be attacking that shoulder because these are places that bend. Muay Thai will help me make that entry into that place. And I may even be able to add a Pekiti flavor to my Muay Thai where maybe I'm using that Muay Thai elbow on someone's cross and breaking the hand as it comes through. Muay Thai is helping me to build the coordination between my elbow so that I can, and the accuracy and precision of my elbow so that I can parry someone's hand onto the elbow, breaking it. Then Pekiti is helping me pick out the targets I want for follow-up strikes or follow-up locks. And if I choose to do a lock, Jiu-Jitsu is giving me the knowledge to be able to lock the target that I have chosen through my knowledge of Pekiti apexes. So everything eventually for me flows back into Pekiti. And that's sort of the way that I hope it always goes. Because these are just, at the end of the day, Pekiti is the art I love. It's my foundation, it's my base art. And it's the art that I want to do till the day I die. And so anything that I do, and there's some other arts I do, like Shastra Vidya, Sanatana Shastra Vidya, something I've just started a couple of years ago. It's an Indian weapon-based art. It's taught by a man called Aditya Roy. And that has changed my understanding of Pekiti. It has shown me perspectives and opened doors in my mind that I didn't even know existed. When it comes to being more efficient, when it comes to footwork, when it comes to striking, when it comes to coordinating my weapons. Shastra Vidya has shown me things or helped me come to realizations or helped me like have light bulb moments consistently. In fact, I messaged Gurudev literally like 2 days ago, telling him this, being that every single class I teach, now I'm getting an insight that's inspired by Shastra Vidya. That's helping me grow my Pekiti.
That's, so would you be willing to do one more of these with me? Because I feel like we just literally gone through half the things I wanted to talk about, but I feel we can.
I'll do as many as I love ranting, as you know. I love ranting and raving, especially when it comes to martial arts. I can talk.
No, but I think this is amazing, Tuhon, and I think we're gonna stop this one.
Ask me like controversial questions. So it's all like safe, sweet thing. I want to represent India well. I want to represent GT well. I want to represent myself well, right? Being a Tuhon, I want to represent everybody well. I want to represent people who have just started Pekiti, and I want to represent the other Tuhons well. And that is a responsibility that I will spend the rest of my life working towards.
So before we close, I have some questions that people have written in, who we shall not name. And I am going to ask you to give me one-line answers to these questions, if it's possible. I have doubts. Okay, the first one, which I thought was really interesting, was what was your one biggest takeaway from GT?
One biggest takeaway from GT?
Repeating the question counts as your one-line answer, as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, then you're not going to get an answer then. My one biggest takeaway from GT is evolution is a lifelong process.
That's
It is a lifelong process.
Yeah. You're stopping.
I mean, I can go on.
Do not.
Ass answer.
Wait. This was another one that someone was really interested in. In one line, I will give you 2 lines for this. Explain why PTK is the most effective Filipino martial art.
I can't. I don't know enough about other Filipino martial arts.
Okay. This is, I don't know if you can answer this.
I can give an answer to the question though. I would not necessarily run behind PTK. I would run behind a good teacher. If you want to do Filipino martial arts, look for the best teacher, regardless of whether it's PTK or whatever, because that's going to give you the most bang for your buck. Because
which is the next question. Who according to you are the best teachers for PTK in the world today?
I mean, GT, obviously. Tuhon Philip, Tuhon Kanishk. I've only very Tuhon Depita. I'm going to just name all my friends. Tuhon Mick, Tuhon Jay, Tuhon Belton. Is there anyone I'm forgetting that I really like training with? I mean, every time I get my hands on Tuhon Philip, I try and get as much from him as I can. For sure, Tuhon Philip is the go-to guy currently. I did have a chance to do 1 or 2 seminars with Tuhon Loki from Canada. He's also a student of Tuhon Philip. I loved every second of that, and I've had a chance of doing a couple of sessions with a lot of Tuhons, and a lot of them have been great. I still think Tuhon Philip is the top of my list, just because of how much he's seen and how much he knows, and the fact that he fights. He's one of the original dog brothers. He's fought gazillion times, and so everything he teaches you, you know that there is no more hardcore guy than Tuhon Philip, and so if he's teaching you something, in spite of all of his fighting experience, there must be a reason.
Okay, next one. This is an interesting one. In your opinion, how are Tuhons as a category different from each other, and how are they similar?
It depends on whether, okay, actually most, I can't think of a single, it's one line. Because GT has taught everyone differently, right? So he's taught me stuff differently from the way he's taught to Ganesh differently from the way he taught other people differently. So the same thing, for example, range of footwork, I do differently to Ganesh does differently. And GT has made sure that we do it in this specific way. So if I do it he's been like, no, you must do it this way. But he's told somebody else, no, you must do it this way. So we've all been taught differently. And that's why a lot of our expressions are a little bit different. Also, at some point, you start to specialize in something. I think you should specialize in something. So I try and specialize in double sword. And so that sort of also leads you down. So if you see a lot of what I talk about is double weapon oriented, rule the double weapons and stuff like that. A lot of my teaching is double weapon oriented. So that also makes it a little bit different. The people who you're teaching makes it different. Like, are you teaching military? Are you teaching civilians? Who are you teaching? That also can make stuff different. Similarities. I don't know similarities that can be across the board, because at this point I can't even say that GT is your main teacher as a similarity for every Tuhon across the board. I guess maybe I can't think of similarities that are across the board.
This is an interesting one. I don't know if you can answer this. So somebody said, please ask Tuhon if there are 2 people sparring and one person is if one person is doing Balinta walk and one person is doing Pekiti Tirsia Kali, would he be able to pick out the PTK practitioner?
You should be able to.
you should be able to?
Well, again, I don't know actually, because I've seen Multidisciplinary practitioners fight, and maybe you would see them, maybe more live hand stuff. Maybe they try and close in more. I'm not sure. Maybe I haven't seen enough Multidisciplinary practitioners fight. Maybe that could be the thing. I have seen some. Maybe I haven't seen enough to say that yes, I can tell the difference between a Pekiti practitioner and a Multidisciplinary practitioner.
Slimy answer. Okay, let's see. Last question is
Sorry, I'm not saying Bindwak people can't fight at all. That's not what
that's why I'm going to edit it. I'm going to edit it.
That's not at all what I meant. In fact, their hand speed is frighteningly incredible. I am just saying I haven't seen enough Bindwak practitioners fight to know that this is how they express themselves in that sort of stick fighting.
Question. Do you think a weapon provides a false sense of security? I didn't actually know what that meant. I just thought it was an interesting question.
Was this asked by? That's going to get me in trouble if I say this.
Yes,
it depends on the weapon. It depends on the weapon. It depends also on how stupid you are. I'm going to be sweet. Like I know people who walk around with a knife in the pocket and like, oh, I have a knife in my pocket, I'm going to be safe. And then you ask them, have you ever for a second thought about what would happen if you had to, God forbid, draw that knife? Are you willing to put that into another person? And then you just see the face go white, right? This is a question that happens that's asked a lot in like gun communities, where people are like, oh, I'll just shoot the guy, right? And then people they made this rule called the 21-foot rule, where if I have a knife in my hand and you have a gun in your hand, and not a gun in your hand, if you have a holstered gun and I have a knife in my hand, or a concealed knife, I can still reach you within 21 feet before you can get off an accurate shot. Most times, right?
Throwing a knife at someone.
No, just
like bridging that.
By the time I run it, it's 21 feet. So, yes, if you haven't done the training, for example, we have one of my students. He's a special forces guy. He specializes in sidearms. He'll have that gun out, cocked, loaded, aimed, like before you can take 2 steps, right? But that's training. If you haven't done the training, you're not going to get to your weapon. Especially in a knife fight, where statistics say that most knife attacks happen within 3 feet, blind side of the person. You're not going to see the guy coming, and before you even know what's happening, there's a knife in play. So in that context, are you trying to tell me you're trying to fend off a knife or trying to get your gun at the same time? It's hard. It's really hard, and if you haven't trained for it, it's not going to happen. So if you train for it, then I don't think you take these things lightly. If you haven't trained for it, you can get a false sense of security.
I'm going to ask you this last question, and I swear to God, somebody, please ask Tuhon Aditya if he thinks that he could take Conor McGregor in a fight if he had a stick in his hand.
Doubtful.
If you had a stick in your hand.
A stick is not some magic weapon that's going to knock him out.
Yes, that is the definition of the stick.
No, a stick is not. If I swing a stick at Conor McGregor, first of all, this is a guy who has fought professionally at the most elite of elite levels. He's not just an elite striker, he's also an elite grappler, right? Whatever you might think in the UFC where he stands in terms of elite striker, grappler, doesn't matter. The fact that he's reached that level makes him an elite striker and makes him an elite grappler. These guys have incredible sense of range, have incredible sense of timing, can adapt to things incredibly well. Will I hit him? Of course I hit him. If I don't knock him out in the first strike, he's gonna take me down and destroy me. That's what's because I will have the reach advantage, but as soon as he gets past that stick, once he can grab my hand, grab me, or grab the stick or whatever, he's an elite grappler. And then the stick, if you give me a blade, it will be different. It might be different. If you give me a sword, it will definitely be different. But that's because now that one shot ends the fight, right? Like with the stick, if I don't end the fight in that first hit, I'm in trouble.
I'm just gonna. Yes, Tuhon Aditya thinks he can defeat Conor.
No. I really hate MMA.
Thank you so much for your time today. And I have a feeling that there's going to be lots of questions.
She is censoring me.
I am censoring you.
So many more things to say, so many more rants to give.
Oh my Lord, it's been a year and a half of rants. Okay, well, thank you so much for talking to me. And I'm sure we're going to get lots and lots of questions after this, which I will put together. And I'm sure this will become a bi-monthly thing, which will be a lot of fun. We can talk about all kinds of things.
It's a bi-monthly thing, but we'll see.
Okay, thank you, Tuhon, Aditya.
Thank you, Neha.
You're welcome.